Well, welcome to book 58, week 58. And this time I've got something a little bit different. Um, this is a book um, by André de Balzac, and it's called The Sign of the Cat and the Racket 1. And what this is in my book collection at home. I have a 25 volume collection of the complete work of Honoré de Balzac. This is bought for me by a ex-girlfriend as a graduation present, basically, our birthday present. Um, she paid $100 for it. It's 25 volumes, and it is supposedly, according to what it claims in its front matter. See if I can get this open here. It is the first complete edition of the human comedy in English. Now, is that really true? I don't know. But in any case, 1904 is apparently the year this was published. That's always been what I've thought. Okay, so what is it? Well, Balzac, Henri de Balzac, was a French writer who wrote from about 1820s to his death in about 1850. So about a 30-year period. And during this period, he did lots of different things. But about 1830 or so, he settled on being a writer. Was always a writer, but he settled on being a writer of a particular thing, which is he wrote a series of novels called The Human Comedy or The Comedy Humaine. And what this is about um, close to 100 different novels and short stories that are arranged in a particular order. And various characters come and go between the novels. There are short stories. There are 2,000 different characters at least, and that's, I guess, named characters, and many of them reappear in different points in their life. And so, what he had attempted to do is provide an overall picture of humanity in Paris, France, Paris, mostly Paris, of his day. And that's what he set out to do. And so that's what he did. And some of them, um, in France, it is very common for people to read uh, one or two of his novels in their education. There are two in particular that they read, one called, and I'm going to slaughter this. I'm supposed to know French, but, I still cannot pronounce this word, Pierre Goriot, Father Goriot. And the other one is Eugenie Grandet. And those are the ones that most people tend to read in France when they're in high school. And of course, he also wrote some short stories which stand alone, so sometimes people read those. And there are some other things, like there's a novel called Lost Illusions that is a pretty common one to be read as well. So there are several that are still read today. Now, reading all 25 volumes of it, well, as you can imagine, that's a massive undertaking. Reading all, some odd hundred, some odd books or works by him. And part of the problem there is getting a hold of them. As a matter of fact, this translation, the more famous works, like the ones I've mentioned, have been translated many times since. But there are some works that are included in this that have not been translated into English since this time because they're like the lesser known work of a great writer. And make no mistake, Balzac is considered to be one of the greats of the 18th century French novel, one of the fathers of realism, um, and we'll get into some of that. So I do not know how many of the 25 I will read, but we're starting with number one, and we'll just go and see what happens. I'll intersperse it with other things. I mean, I'm not one to read one author week after week after week after week. I switch up. So, in fact, next week it's going to be the Pickwick Papers by Dickens, which is Dickens' first published novel. We'll get to that next week. So this week, what do we have for you? We have the first volume of Balzac. Now, this includes several different stories. It includes The Sign of the Cat and Racket, something called The Sceaux Ball, The Purse, The Vendetta, Madame Firmiani, A Daughter of Eve, and Letters of Two Brides. Those are all included in here. Letters of Two Brides is a full novel. A Daughter of Eve, I guess you could call it a novel. The rest are a little bit shorter. Novellas, some of them even just short stories. But that is what's included in this first volume. And this is the traditional order. They're not the order in which they were necessarily written. They're the order that Balzac specified they should be read. So, what's going on here? Okay, so most of these stories deal with young men and young women who are desirous of getting married. Letters of Two Brides, the last one, in fact, is the most complete picture here, really. And what it is it's the only novel Balzac wrote in epistolary form and letter form. And what he's done here is he's had two girls who grew up in a convent and come out of the convent right when they turn 18 and decide they're not going to go into being a nun. They instead want to get married and go that way. Because bear in mind, dealing here, this was written in the 1840s, dealing here the first half of the 19th century, women didn't have a lot of choices in France. It was a matter of who they were going to marry, not if they were going to get married, hopefully, because getting married was the only way they could do things like they might want to do, like have property, stay in society, and that kind of thing. So, particularly women in this upper class society, they wanted to stay there. Now, you may wonder, well, why? well, um, there were all kinds of opportunities afforded to people who had landed money, who had a fortune. And there were, in this time period, an up-and-coming middle class that was, like the nouveau riche. These were tradesmen who began to make money, who began to afford some of the finer things in life. But the fine things in life were pretty much only available to the rich. And these included things like clean clothes. I mean, seriously. It is a sign of a certain class if your linen, which is basically your underclothes, are white. If they have yellowed with age or if they're ragged or dirty, then you're of a lower class. So only the upper classes had enough time, enough money, and enough resources, in this case, to hire servants. They didn't wash their own clothes, of course, to hire servants to do things like wash their clothes. The poor did what they could do, and the middle class did what they could afford, depending on where they were. But just like in Dostoevsky, if you remember, the woman Sophia, she was of the poor, she was of the working class, but she had to work as a prostitute in order to provide for her family. And so she had to buy a certain amount of finery to walk on the streets because you couldn't just, but her finery was the cheapest of the finery and marked her immediately as a prostitute. Her yellow card did as well. So that entire kind of stigma of the way that one dresses, perfume. Perfume was not just a matter of wanting to smell like this particular flower or that particular flower. It was a necessity in an era that didn't have very good sanitation. Walking in the street could mean walking in feces and filth. And so the rich could afford carriages to carry them from place to place, and that way not actually step in the filth in the street and only step on the sidewalks that were elevated away from the filth. And you get the idea. So there was a very huge life interest in wanting to maintain oneself in this class if one happened to be in this class, which meant that there were social rules that one had to follow. And one of those rules for women was being uh, very prim and proper. Uh, a woman who was alone with a man could become completely destroyed socially. A woman who got a racy note from a man who and that got out, she could be destroyed. So any number of indiscretions could destroy a woman's reputation in this era. And this is entirely beside the point about what she intended or not intended to do and what the guy intended or not to do. They may have been very innocently just as friends looking at, say, paintings and seen by the wrong person, the wrong rumor mill gets going, and boom, destroyed. And he would suffer as well, but not as badly. Because for a guy, his main reputation was not on his morals, but on his finances and his honor as a gentleman and that kind of thing. And even the honor could be overcome if he was an exciting or bold enough character. This is what large R romance deals with. Remember, in Sense and Sensibility, we had Eleanor, who was very sensible, and we had Marianne, who was very sensibility. There's a place where Marianne goes off with Willoughby in a um, open carriage, just them two together, to go look at his estate. That would have destroyed so many reputations right there. That was a huge no-no. Okay, so it's in this environment, in this milieu, that Balzac is writing. And in fact, the very first story here, The Sign of the Cat and Racket, is a story of working class people who are trying to marry their daughters into a higher class. And it deals with also a issue which rises here, which we've seen in 18th century literature as well. We see it some in Austen, as well as the families trying to make desirable matches for the men and desirable matches for politics that don't meet the women's interests. And so the women have that right of refusal, which is really the only right they've got, the right of refusal. They cannot be married to someone without their consent. They have to consent to marriage. But family will put pressure. But women want, like Marianne and Willoughby, women, at least in the novels, who knows about reality? In the novels, women often want that love match. They don't want the arranged marriage. And that's what comes up again, again, and again. At the Sign of the Cat and Racket, that is basically the conflict going on there. And one sister marries for love, one sister marries for the family, and one of their marriages works out, and one of them doesn't. And again, Balzac has the ones that are more pragmatic and more practical being the ones that went out. That's the same thing that happens in Letters of Two Brides. Remember, it's two women in a convent who are writing letters to each other. They grow up, they meet men, and one of them agrees to marry a man who is good for her family, and she goes on to have three children and grow up out in the country with her children. And the other woman marries a man for romantic reasons, and it, it works out in terms of being a marriage, but eventually it comes apart. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. It's a first marriage. First marriage, he dies because romance, Romeo and Juliet, this kind of thing, got to die for love, kind of thing. So he dies. Then she's a rich widow, and she marries a younger guy for love, for his looks, and this time she is insanely jealous because she's younger and she knows her beauty is going to fade. In fact, we get a specific date here. Apparently, in this era, if what Balzac says here in The Voices of Women is true, 40 is considered old. That's past your prime. That's when you're no longer have any looks to speak of. So 40. Don't know. That's what these girls say anyway. Um, this girl ends up not having, woman ends up not having any children. Um, and in her second marriage, she gets insanely jealous because the guy's younger than her and makes a mistake about something that he does and winds up uh, getting consumption and dying of consumption. So we're still in an era where, a woman has a difficult time surviving bad social choices. So we have moved on from Clarissa Harlow in 1740. We're 100 years later, but we still have the same issue that a woman who makes bad choices uh, can't be allowed to live in fiction. Um, and that's what happens here. Okay, so what's interesting about this last story, it's the only thing Balzac ever wrote in epistolary form, which is considered to be an older form by that time. It was kind of old school. It's an excellent little novel, however, and has in it some of the first scenes, I think, in official European literature dealing with things like childbirth and dealing with things like raising children. Um, Balzac uses the form of these two women writing letters to each other to kind of sort of go into their private lives in ways that he couldn't do in a more outside voice. And so he shows us uh, the mother bathing her children and caring about her children, even changing diapers and things like this. We hear about the children breastfeeding, and the choice of her breastfeeding is a remarkable choice because in this time period, we still had the upper class giving their children out to wet nurses and not nursing them themselves. So she takes great delight in being a mother, and there's lots of commentary here about motherhood being the pinnacle of womanhood and things like that. So you have to take that into account, both in terms of the time period in which Balzac is writing and the particular point of view Balzac is expressing. This is a woman who has made this choice, and Balzac approves of the choice, the society approves of the choice, and of course, this woman is going to defend that choice. So, is there some sexism here? Yes. Is the sexism partially from the author and not necessary? Yes, absolutely. But some of it is in the character, and some of it is in the society in which she lives, in which she doesn't have free choices. And that's actually been acknowledged in various places in the stories. So, this is not explicit, but the animalistic body, as I've read somewhere, animalistic body does appear here more than it does in Austen, for instance. This is written 20 years after Austen, and we do have bodies. We do have female bodies. We don't have naked female bodies. We don't have desire. We don't have the personal, private details of a woman's body. We don't have menstruation, for instance. We don't have too much about those kinds of things, but it's mentioned in passing in various kinds of ways. Like the woman who doesn't have kids says at one point she's disappointed again. And we know that means that she's gotten her period. But it's not called that, it's not mentioned explicitly. But we know that's what it meant because that would have been the euphemism at the time. Okay, and the other stories here are about various other things, but relate to this same thing. Like the Vendetta deals with two um, a love match between two characters who are of Corsican background, and what happened is the father of the girl had a vendetta against a family, and one boy got away from that family. Various things happen. Everybody grows up and this girl in Paris meets a boy and turns out to be this boy and she wants to marry him and it turns out that there's a vendetta. They have to kill this guy. And so it ends in a kind of tragedy, which I'm not going to go into here. The Purse is an interesting little slight story about a young man in a rooming house. He's an artist and he lives in the top of the rooming house where he is doing paintings. And in the floor below him, there's an older woman and a younger woman who have two different last names, and one of them's called like a duchess or something. And he gets to start to know them and fall in love with the young woman of the two. but he notices some disturbing things that make them think that maybe they are making their money through disreputable means. And he accidentally leaves his money purse with $14 in it, which is a lot of money at the time. Well, not dollars, but 14 francs, I think, there. And uh, it disappears. And he thinks, oh, these women who are, he thinks, streetwalkers, these women just stole his money. Well, turns out that the younger daughter, the young girl, the younger woman, in a kind of romantic little gesture, wanted to get him a better purse for his money or something. I don't really know exactly, but he comes back again, and she gives him this decorated purse, and then they get married, and blah blah blah. So one of the more interesting ones here is one called Madame Firmiani, which what's interesting about this is it's about a young woman who has money, and she's called Madame Firmiani, and uh, everybody has an opinion about her because she's out in society. And Balzac is exhaustive. Um, if we go to this, 256, if we go to this, okay, and in these days, our language has as many dialects as there are men in the great human family. It's a really curious and interesting thing to listen to the different views or versions of one and the same thing. And thus, do you know Madame Firmiani? And this man interpret Madame Firmiani by such an inventory as this: a large house in Rue de Bach, rooms handsomely furnished, fine pictures, 100,000 francs a year in good security, a husband, etc. And then it would go on. Uh, Turn to your right and go question a young man who belongs to the lounger species. So the lounger species, and repeat your inquiry. And he'll say, yeah, she receives on Wednesdays, a very good house to know. Madame Firmiani has already metamorphosed into a house. To folk of this type, Madame Firmiani keeps a sort of inn without a sign. Why on earth do you want to go to Madame Firmiani's? It's as dull there as at a court. That's a different person from than the other person. And then another one. Oh, Madame Firmiani, my dear fellow, is one of those adorable women whom nature feels to be a sufficient excuse for all the ugly ones she has created by mistake. She is bewitching. She is kind. This young man is a schoolboy, known for his audacious bearing among men and extreme shyness in private. Madame Firmiani, cries another, twirling his cane in the air, I will tell you what I think of her. She is a woman of between 30 and 35, face a little passé, blah, blah, blah. She has a collection of magnificent pictures on her house. Go and see her, says another. Nothing can be finer. You have come to the species amateur. Okay, so it goes on for several pages of different people who see Madame Firmiani. And the whole story deals with the fact that they all get her a little wrong. They all see what they see, but there are things going on in her life that none of them know. And that's what the story is about. And so that kind of looking at these personal private lives of women, and that is very specifically the focus of this particular volume. Apparently, the next volume, which is called A Study of Woman, Volume 2, apparently that is going to deal with some of the opinions of men about women. So that's what I mean by Balzac telling this whole story of this whole society of these 2,000 people in Paris. Just like this one little story of Madame Firmiani, we get several different points of view. That's what the whole thing is going to do. And by the way, these numbers 1, 2, 3, that's not necessarily the pagination that Balzac had in mind. It's just the pagination that fit with this particular edition. So, yeah, these are all meant as independent but related stories. It's kind of like the crossover episodes and that kind of thing. Um, Minor characters, like there already is in this, the character Rastignac, which is a very important character later on, just walks through one of these stories. It's not really important that it's him, but it adds richness to the story to know that this is the same guy who does other things in other novels. All right, so next week, Pickwick Papers.